They said Africa could never break free. They said the chains of economic control were too strong. They said true independence was impossible in the modern world. They were wrong. In the heart of West Africa, a revolution is unfolding that has world powers terrified. A 34-year-old military captain has shattered decades of Western dominance in just 2 years. The wealth extraction that drained billions from his nation stopped. The corruption that kept his people in poverty crushed. The hidden truth about Africa's potential for self-determination now exposed for the world to see. This is the story of how one landlocked nation became the symbol of African freedom and economic control. This is the story of how Ibrahim Traoré turned Burkina Faso from a forgotten corner of the Sahel into a beacon of hope that's inspiring a continent-wide awakening. But here's what they don't want you to know about this revolution. It's not just about politics. It's about something far more powerful. Something that could change the balance of global power forever. What happens when a nation decides to truly fly free? In January 2022, Burkina Faso was a nation trapped in crisis. Jihadist attacks plagued the countryside, claiming over 2,000 lives annually. French military bases dotted the landscape like colonial outposts, a constant reminder of dependency. The economy hemorrhaged resources to foreign corporations, while 40% of citizens struggled below the poverty line. The government seemed powerless, caught between international pressure and domestic chaos. Then came the coup that transformed everything. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, barely 34 years old, emerged as the leader of a movement that would fundamentally reshape not just Burkina Faso, but the entire concept of African sovereignty in the 21st century. What followed wasn't merely a change of government. It was a complete reimagining of what an African nation could become. Within months, French forces were ordered out after 8 years of ineffective presence. Mining contracts that favored foreign interests were reviewed and restructured, reclaiming billions in potential revenue. The narrative of dependency that had defined Burkina Faso's relationship with the world began to crumble. But Traoré understood something that previous African leaders had missed. True independence in the modern world isn't just about political control or even economic sovereignty. It's about mastering the infrastructure of connection itself. This is where Burkina Faso's story becomes truly extraordinary. While the world focused on the political drama, Traoré was quietly orchestrating something far more strategic, an aviation revolution that would serve as the foundation for his nation's transformation. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. A landlocked country, surrounded by nations still trapped in cycles of foreign dependence, was preparing to soar above the limitations that geography and history had imposed. The revival of Air Burkina became the cornerstone of this vision. The national airline, once a symbol of failed state enterprises across Africa, was reimagined as an instrument of sovereignty. But this wasn't just about national pride or prestige projects. Traoré understood that in an increasingly connected world, a nation's ability to control its own transportation networks directly translates to its ability to control its economic destiny. When you can't fly your own citizens, move your own goods, or welcome visitors on your own terms, you're not truly independent. You're still a client state dressed up in the illusion of sovereignty. The numbers tell the story of ambition that matches the scale of the challenge. A comprehensive $3.8 billion investment package spans airport modernizations, fleet expansions, and the complete overhaul of Burkina Faso's aviation infrastructure. These aren't just infrastructure projects, they're declarations of independence written across the sky. Every new runway represents a pathway that bypasses traditional colonial trade routes. Every aircraft in the revitalized Air Burkina fleet becomes a symbol of a nation that refuses to remain grounded by the expectations of others. Ouagadougou Airport's transformation exemplifies this broader vision. What was once a modest regional facility handling 450,000 passengers annually is being reimagined as a continental hub capable of processing over 2 million travelers per year. The technical specifications matter less than the strategic implications. Burkina Faso is positioning itself not just as a destination, but as a bridge connecting different parts of Africa that have been artificially separated by colonial borders and their economic legacies. But revolutions aren't built in the sky alone, they're rooted in the soil. And it's here, in the red earth of Burkina Faso, where Traoré's vision becomes most visceral, most transformative, and most emotionally powerful. For generations, Burkinabe farmers watched their raw cashews shipped overseas, only to see them return as expensive processed products they couldn't afford. They grew 800,000 tons of tomatoes annually that rotted in the fields while imported paste filled their markets. They worked 12 million hectares of arable land with hand tools while their youth fled to cities, convinced that agriculture was the path of poverty, not prosperity. This was the agricultural colonialism that kept Burkina Faso trapped, a nation blessed with fertile soil and industrious farmers, yet forced to export potential and import finished goods. The psychological weight of this dependency was crushing. Every harvest season became a reminder of what could be, but never was. Every young person who abandoned the farm for uncertain urban futures represented dreams deferred and traditions severed. The land that should have been the foundation of prosperity had become a symbol of limitation. Then came the transformation that rewrote everything. Picture the moment when the first massive cashew processing plant hummed to life in Bobo Dioulasso, capable of processing 50,000 tons annually. The machines that had once existed only in distant factories were now here, on Burkinabe soil, operated by Burkinabe hands, creating value that would remain in Burkinabe communities. The raw nuts that had traveled thousands of miles to be processed were now transformed just miles from where they grew. The profit margins that had enriched foreign corporations were now flowing to local cooperatives, local workers, local families. The emotional impact was immediate and profound. Farmers who had been paid mere cents per kilogram for their raw cashews were now partners in a value chain they controlled. Women who had struggled to support their families were now skilled machine operators earning steady wages equivalent to $180 monthly, triple the previous average. Children who had watched their parents toil for subsistence were now seeing agriculture as a pathway to prosperity. The plant wasn't just processing nuts, it was processing decades of psychological defeat into something approaching economic pride. The tomato processing facilities tell an even more dramatic story of transformation. Walk through the state-of-the-art factories that now dot the countryside, processing 200,000 tons annually, and you witness more than industrial machinery. You witness the death of dependency. The imported tomato paste that had dominated local markets couldn't compete with the quality and freshness of locally processed products. The farmers who had watched their harvest spoil were now contracted partners in a supply chain that valued their output at premium prices. The seasonal unemployment that had plagued rural communities was replaced by year-round economic activity, supporting over 15,000 direct jobs. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this agricultural transformation isn't the scale of the infrastructure, it's how it's being funded. While other African nations mortgaged their futures to foreign creditors for development projects, Burkina Faso pioneered something unprecedented. Grassroots community funding that turns every citizen into a stakeholder in the nation's agricultural revolution. Local communities pooled resources to purchase 5,000 modern tractors, irrigation equipment, and processing machinery. Diaspora networks channeled over $200 million in remittances directly into agricultural cooperatives. The funding model itself became an act of sovereignty, development financed by Burkinabes, for Burkinabes, controlled by Burkinabes. The sight of brand new tractors rolling through villages that had known only hand tools for generations carries emotional weight that transcends economics. These aren't just machines, they're manifestations of dignity restored. When a farmer who has been over crops under the scorching sun for decades climbs into an air-conditioned tractor cab, it's not just about increased productivity. It's about respect. It's about a nation that finally values the hands that feed it. The youth agricultural programs represent perhaps the most profound shift of all. For decades, agricultural work was seen as the fate of those who couldn't escape rural life. Young people were taught to view farming as backward, unprofitable, shameful. The brain drain from rural to urban areas was considered inevitable, a natural consequence of development and progress. Traoré's government shattered this narrative by making agriculture attractive, profitable, and prestigious. Picture the training centers where young Burkinabés learn precision agriculture, sustainable farming techniques, and agribusiness management. These aren't desperate youth with no other options. These are ambitious young people who see agriculture as their pathway to success. They're mastering GPS-guided planning systems, learning commodity trading, and planning agricultural startups. The generational change is visible in their confidence, their technical sophistication, and their pride in choosing the land over the city. The psychological transformation is as important as the economic one. When young people stay in rural areas by choice rather than circumstance, when they see farming as innovation rather than tradition, when they view agricultural work as entrepreneurial rather than subsistence, that's when a true revolution takes root. These young farmers aren't just producing food. They're producing a new narrative about African potential, African dignity, and African self-determination. But true sovereignty isn't just about what a nation produces. It's about who controls the flow of opportunity within its borders. This is where Burkina Faso's revolution becomes intensely personal, touching the daily struggles and dreams of ordinary citizens in ways that previous governments never dared to imagine. The establishment of the Post Bank represents more than financial infrastructure. It's a declaration that every Burkinabé, regardless of their economic status, deserves access to the tools of prosperity. For decades, banking in Burkina Faso was the privilege of the connected few. Only 15% of adults had access to formal financial services. Small farmers couldn't access credit for seeds and equipment. Market women couldn't secure loans to expand their businesses. Young entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas were shut out by systems that demanded collateral they couldn't provide and connections they didn't possess. The traditional banking sector, dominated by foreign institutions, had no incentive to serve those who needed financial services most desperately. The rural majority remained trapped in cash economies, vulnerable to every drought, every market fluctuation, every family emergency. The post-bank revolution changes this fundamental equation. Picture the moment when a rural seamstress walks into a postal office in her village and walks out with her first business loan of $500. The dignity in her stride as she realizes that her government believes in her potential enough to invest in her dreams. The postal worker who processed her application isn't just a civil servant. They're an agent of economic empowerment, transforming every post office into a gateway of opportunity. The microcredit programs flowing through the post bank carry emotional weight that transcends their monetary value. With over 300,000 microloans disbursed in the first year, averaging $150 each, the program reached previously excluded populations. When a young mechanic receives the loan that lets him buy proper tools and rent a workshop space, it's not just about the money, it's about a society that sees potential where others saw only problems. When market women form credit circles that help them weather seasonal fluctuations and invest in inventory, they're not just accessing capital, they're accessing respect. The bank isn't lending money to the poor, it's investing in citizens who were previously invisible to the formal economy. This financial empowerment integrates seamlessly with the social infrastructure that defines Burkina Faso's revolutionary character. The construction of the nation's first geriatric hospital represents more than medical advancement. It's a moral statement about the kind of society being built, one that honors the wisdom of age while empowering the energy of youth. In traditional African societies, elders were revered as repositories of wisdom, the living links between past and future. But colonialism and rapid modernization disrupted these bonds, leaving many elderly Africans marginalized in their own communities. The lack of specialized medical care for aging populations across the continent had become an accepted tragedy, families watching their beloved grandparents suffer from conditions that could be treated if only the right facilities existed. The 200-bed geriatric hospital breaks this cycle of acceptance. Picture the first elderly patient walking through its doors, perhaps a grandmother who had raised a dozen children, who had survived droughts and conflicts, who had watched her nation struggle for true independence her entire life. For the first time, she encounters medical professionals trained specifically in the challenges of aging, equipment designed for her needs, and a facility that treats her advanced years not as an inconvenience, but as a life stage deserving of specialized attention and respect. The emotional resonance of this project extends far beyond its immediate medical impact. When adult children no longer have to choose between caring for aging parents and pursuing their own economic opportunities, when families don't face financial ruin because of medical emergencies affecting their elders, when elderly citizens can age with dignity rather than desperation, that's when a revolution becomes personal for every citizen. The integration of financial services and social infrastructure creates multiplier effects that strengthen the entire society. The Post Bank might provide the microcredit that allows a middle-aged woman to start a catering business, but it's the geriatric hospital that ensures she doesn't have to abandon that business when her elderly mother needs specialized care. This holistic approach to development reflects a sophisticated understanding of how societies actually function. Economic empowerment without social support creates anxiety rather than prosperity, but when they advance together, they create unprecedented transformation. The most audacious aspect of Burkina Faso's transformation isn't visible in processing plants or banking systems. It's unfolding in classrooms across the nation where a radical experiment in human development is taking place. Traoré's government has made a declaration that would be considered impossible in most of the world: free education from primary school through university for every Burkinabe child. This isn't just policy, it's a $1.2 billion bet on the future that could reshape the entire trajectory of West African development. To understand the revolutionary nature of this commitment, you have to grasp what education has meant across much of Africa for generations. In neighboring countries, families still mortgage their farms to pay school fees averaging $200 annually per child. Brilliant children drop out because their parents couldn't afford the next level. Young people choose subjects based not on their passion or aptitude, but on what their families can finance. The brain drain sees Africa's best minds educated abroad and never returning, not because they don't love their countries, but because those countries had never invested enough in them to create opportunities worthy of their potential. Burkina Faso is shattering this cycle with breathtaking boldness. Picture the moment when rural parents realize their children can pursue their dreams without putting the family into debt. The relief in a mother's eyes when she learns that her daughter's brilliance in mathematics won't be wasted because university fees are beyond reach. The transformation in a young person's relationship with their own potential when they understand that their government has already invested in their success before they've even proven themselves. The construction of 3,000 new schools and 12 universities across the country represents more than infrastructure development. It's the physical manifestation of a society's faith in its own future. Each new classroom is a statement that Burkina Faso refuses to accept that its children are less deserving of opportunity than children born in wealthier nations. Each new laboratory is a declaration that the next generation of African scientists and engineers will be trained on African soil, with African values, solving African problems. The specialized training centers emerging across the nation tell the story of a government that understands the connection between education and economic sovereignty. While other countries import expertise, Burkina Faso is growing its own. The Technical Institutes training 5,000 solar energy specialists annually align perfectly with the nation's renewable energy ambitions. The agricultural colleges producing precision farming experts support the agricultural transformation happening in rural communities. The medical schools ensuring every district has locally trained healthcare workers eliminate the dependency on foreign medical missions and expatriate doctors. The healthcare infrastructure revolution deserves special attention because it represents something rarely seen in developing countries: the simultaneous expansion of access and improvement of quality. The 150 new hospitals and clinics aren't just treating more patients, they're treating them better. Modern equipment that rivals facilities in developed countries. Telemedicine systems connecting rural clinics with specialists in Ouagadougou. Emergency care networks that can stabilize critical patients and transport them rapidly to appropriate facilities within the new Golden Hour protocol. The psychological impact of this healthcare transformation extends far beyond immediate medical outcomes. When infant mortality drops by 35% in 2 years, when pregnant women don't fear childbirth because they have access to skilled care, when parents don't watch helplessly as treatable conditions claim their children, when chronic diseases don't mean economic catastrophe, that's when a society begins to dream bigger. The security of knowing that illness won't destroy your family's future is the foundation that allows people to take the entrepreneurial risks that drive economic growth. The integration of education and healthcare creates multiplier effects that will compound for generations. The children receiving free education today will become the doctors staffing the new hospitals tomorrow. The medical students trained in state-of-the-art facilities will pioneer treatments for diseases that disproportionately affect African populations. The engineers educated in Burkinabe universities will design the infrastructure projects that further reduce the nation's dependence on foreign expertise. This investment in human capital represents perhaps the most strategic element of Burkina Faso's transformation. Processing plants can be built quickly, but creating a generation of skilled professionals takes decades. Aviation infrastructure can be purchased, but developing the pilots, mechanics, and air traffic controllers to operate it requires sustained commitment to education. Agricultural modernization can be funded, but producing the veterinarians, agricultural engineers, and research scientists to advance it demands world-class universities. The young Burkinabe students filling these new classrooms carry the future of the nation in their backpacks. Some will become the agricultural scientists who develop drought-resistant crops adapted to local conditions. Others will become the software engineers who design the digital platforms supporting the country's economic transformation. Still others will become the doctors who eliminate preventable diseases or the teachers who educate the generation that follows them. But perhaps the most visionary aspect of Burkina Faso's transformation is how it's redefining what African development can look like in the 21st century. While other nations repeat the environmental mistakes of industrialized countries, Burkina Faso is proving that you can build prosperity without destroying the planet that sustains it. The green infrastructure projects emerging across the nation aren't just about environmental responsibility. They're about environmental leadership that positions Burkina Faso at the forefront of sustainable development in Africa. The massive solar energy installations dotting the landscape tell the story of a nation that refused to accept energy poverty as inevitable. In a region where 60% of the population still lacks reliable electricity, Burkina Faso is leapfrogging directly to renewable energy systems that could power not just homes and businesses, but the entire industrial transformation happening across the country. The 200-megawatt solar farms aren't just generating electricity, they're generating independence from fossil fuel imports, creating 8,000 jobs in emerging green industries, and establishing Burkina Faso as a potential energy exporter to neighboring countries still dependent on expensive and unreliable power grids. The reforestation initiatives represent something even more profound, a nation healing the scars of desertification while creating economic opportunities. The ambitious goal of planting 50 million trees by 2025 employs thousands of rural youth in meaningful work that directly improves their communities. The agroforestry projects integrate environmental restoration with agricultural productivity, proving that economic development and environmental protection aren't competing priorities, they're complementary strategies. Every seedling planted is a vote of confidence in Burkina Faso's future, a physical manifestation of hope that the next generation will inherit a country more prosperous and more beautiful than the one they're building today. The sustainable urban planning transforming cities like Ouagadougou showcases how African development can avoid the environmental disasters that plagued rapid industrialization elsewhere. Green building standards that reduce energy consumption by 40%. Urban forests that combat air pollution while providing recreation spaces for 2 million residents. Water management systems that capture and recycle precious resources rather than wasting them. Public transportation networks that reduce emissions while improving mobility for all citizens, not just those who can afford private vehicles. Step back and witness what has been accomplished in just 2 years. 10 transformative megaprojects that individually would be impressive for any nation, but together represent something unprecedented in modern African history. The aviation revolution connecting Burkina Faso to the world on its own terms. The agricultural transformation feeding the nation while empowering its farmers. The financial empowerment making every citizen a stakeholder in prosperity. The social infrastructure honoring elders while investing in youth. The educational revolution creating the leaders of tomorrow. The green development proving sustainability and prosperity can advance together. This isn't just about infrastructure or economics. It's about dignity. It's about a nation that decided its people deserved better and then made that vision reality through $8.2 billion in strategic investments. It's about leadership that thinks in decades rather than election cycles. It's about an Africa that refuses to accept limitation as destiny. But the most remarkable aspect of Burkina Faso's transformation isn't what has been built, it's what has been proven. For too long, the narrative about Africa has been written by others, focused on what the continent lacks rather than what it possesses. Burkina Faso has shattered that narrative. Every processing plant proves that Africans can add value to their own resources. Every new school demonstrates that African governments can invest in their people's potential. Every hospital shows that quality healthcare isn't a luxury that only wealthy nations can afford. Every green energy project establishes that environmental leadership and economic development can happen simultaneously. The ripple effects of this transformation are already being felt across West Africa and beyond. Ghana is studying Burkina Faso's community funding models. Mali is adapting its agricultural processing strategies. Youth across the continent are looking at what's possible when governments actually serve their people rather than foreign interests. The African Union has designated Burkina Faso as a case study for sustainable development, and World Bank officials have called it the most comprehensive transformation in contemporary African history. This is more than Burkina Faso's story, it's Africa's story. It's the story of what becomes possible when a continent stops accepting limitations and starts demanding excellence. But here's what I want to know from you. Which of these 10 transformative projects impacted you most? Was it the agricultural revolution that's feeding families while empowering farmers? The aviation projects that literally lift the nation to new heights? The educational transformation that's creating tomorrow's African leaders? Or perhaps the green infrastructure that proves you can build prosperity without destroying the planet? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to see what's possible when African leadership serves African people. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because this transformation is just getting started and the next chapter of Africa's rise is being written right now. The age of African dependency is ending. The era of African excellence has begun, and it's happening in a landlocked nation in the heart of West Africa that decided to prove the world wrong about what Africa can achieve. Burkina Faso didn't just transform itself, it transformed what we believe is possible. The question isn't whether other African nations can follow this path. The question is, which nation will be next to join this revolution of dignity, prosperity, and hope? The future is being built today. And for the first time in generations, that future is being built by Africans for Africans on African terms. This is just the beginning.